Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the People and Health Scrutiny Committee. I can't remember what the date is. It's the 11th of September. It's a Monday morning. Okay, so if we get cracking with the agenda, can I have apologies, please?
Good morning. There are apologies from Councillor Belinda Rideout.
Thank you very much. Can I have any declarations of interest, please? Does any member have a declaration of interest? Councillor Orell.
Thank you, Chair. My wife inherited a property and it's currently being used to house 2 Ukrainian families. So I'll withdraw from any debate on that.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Orell. If there are no other declarations, should you realise that you've got a declaration of interest during the meeting, please just put your hand up and we'll record it. Could I have minutes of the last meeting? Has everyone checked them over? Are you all happy with them as a true record of the meeting? Okay, so I will propose them from the chair. If I can have a seconder, please. Thank you, Councillor Kimber, and we'll go for the vote. Thank you. That's accepted the minutes of the last meeting. Public participation. Do we have any members? We've got no members of the public here. Do we have any public online or anything else?
No, there's no public participation.
Thank you. Do we have any councillor questions coming in?
There are no questions submitted from councillors.
And we have no urgent business at the moment, so we're rattling through this, and we're now on to the substantive items. So we're now on to item 7, refugee resettlement and homes for Ukraine. If I can hand over to Claire Shields to do a very short presentation, and then we'll go into the discussion on this. Thank you. If you'd like to stay within the room, Councillor Rowe, please do. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. My name's Claire Shields. I'm the Corporate Director of Commissioning and Partnerships in Children's Services. Work across a number of these schemes on behalf of the Council with a range of other officers and leadership from 2 portfolio holders across the Council. So a really good demonstration of whole Council working to deliver a range of different schemes. Thank you for the opportunity to come back. You had a report in October 2022 which set out progress at that stage, and you wanted to find out a little bit more around the progress of those schemes, but also having a think about the financial implications and the operational implications of that. So I have set those out within the report. The Homes for Ukraine scheme now well established and delivering as we would be expecting. And you can see that over the life of the scheme, we've had 445 host households and almost 1,000 guests that have been through the scheme from the start of that. And you can see that people have moved through the scheme in a number of different ways. So some moving into independent accommodation, some have gone back to Ukraine or to other countries, and others have moved into different areas across the country. You wanted to understand the financial impact of the scheme and the operational impact, and I can provide assurance that the scheme's fully funded and we have been able to bring in additional resources to limit the implications for other staff members. So additional roles like customer service, early help workers and others alongside, and additional capacity within housing as well to be able to meet some of those needs. And I've provided a case study there so you can show the type of work that the scheme has been providing and how it's supporting both hosts and guests within the scheme. The second programme in the report is the UK Resettlement Programme, which has changed over the life of this organisation. So originally supporting people fleeing the conflict in Syria, it is now focused more on supporting Afghans and Afghan resettlement. The programme's funded in a similar way to the Homes for Ukraine. The money's similar, but the scheme is very different in that it requires us to identify a property first and then move through to supporting people to arrive. So it's smaller in scale and smaller numbers. And again, it's fully funded with grant funding, and there is money there to be able to provide across the life of the programme, alongside a small team that really does that work for us, alongside partners as well. And then there's a case study there to demonstrate the type of work that we do in the circumstances of people as they've arrived into the country. And then in the final scheme, and the final work that's described in there, is how we support unaccompanied asylum-seeking children to come through what is primarily through a national transfer scheme. So as children arrive into other parts of the country, there is a national transfer scheme to be able to disperse children into other parts of the area so that we haven't got so much of a burden in one particular area. So that's an important part of the scheme. We're required to participate in a rota. So when we're on the rota, we have to take all the children that have come through in that week or that 2 weeks in the rota. For us, we have to get a quota of around 67 children and young people at any one time. And that's a big ask, really. It's a big increase in the numbers that we've been working with in August and the start of September have been particularly busy. And they've been busy because there's been a new High Court ruling around making it unlawful to place children in hotels. So we've been working quite hard with the Home Office and other places to make sure that those children are removed from hotels and put into proper placements and proper homes that they can be cared for. The challenge with that scheme is identifying placements. It's really difficult for us to identify local placements, and there are some challenges for us in terms of the finance that we get to do that as well. So this scheme is not fully covered in the way that the other two schemes are, and that's creating a bit of a budget pressure for children's services as we move forward. And again, I've provided you a couple of case studies so that you can see where the children have come from, the circumstances around separation and how they've ended up coming here into the UK and the type of support and work that we do. So an overview of the three schemes. Happy to take any questions as we go forward. Thanks.
Thank you. That was really useful. And you've got the report before you this morning. So can I go straight for questions, please? Okay, Councillor Kimber.
Thank you very much for the report. As a question, a couple of points. Obviously, we as a council are obviously very pleased in such dreadful, dreadful circumstances that we've had to house our Ukrainians, and how the question is, how are they settling in? Are they in not only for work but in the life of Dorset? Are they beginning to find it? And the other one was I wanted a bit more update on 4.8 as well, which obviously will interest me with possibly what falls into what I might call asylum seekers. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Kimber.
For 2 seconds, can I just say this paper does not include anything on the barge deliberately, because this is nothing at all to do with the barge, so I will not be taking any questions on there. If I can go over to Claire Shields. I'm sorry, and for the purposes of the recording, I haven't been asking people to introduce themselves, so I'm Jill Taylor, I'm the chair. If I could ask Claire to introduce herself with her job title this time. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, Claire Shields, Corporate Director, Commissioning and Partnerships in Children's Services. And thanks, Councillor Kimber, for your question. Absolutely, in terms of settling for those that have joined us through the Homes for Ukraine scheme, there's been a real warm welcome and lots of community groups that have been coming alongside. They look different all across the county, but we come together sort of on a monthly basis now. We were meeting much more frequently at the start of the scheme just to check in and see how things are going. So lots of work, lots of community events, working really well, support into schools and other education settings around settling in, providing language support, and lots of groups, and a huge sort of gift to the community of Dorset and bringing some of the Ukrainian culture to us, as well as those settling in with us as well. So yeah, all going well.
it's always very interesting when people of other cultures come into our community. Have you got anything that they've brought into our communities that you thought, wow, that is interesting, or you know, it's an offshoot from what they've done? Thank you.
Well, we have some of our Ukrainian people have joined us as a local authority and are working for us and bringing some of their ideas and thinking right through into how we're delivering the programme and moving that forward. But also things like dance and food and culture have been things that people have been talking about and been really good in communities. Lots of support in schools around language and understanding language and the way things work. So a whole range of different things, and it depends on the community really and how the community group has been working alongside.
Councillor Pipe, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Bill Pipe, member for the Litchets and Upton. On 4.5, Claire, we said there are 50 unaccompanied asylum-seeking children who are care leavers. Have these people gone through the earlier processes of being, let's say, sort of under care leaving age, and now transitioned to the to being care leavers? And it also says that of the 50 unaccompanied asylum-seeking children who are care leavers and are receiving support from PAs, with 13 living in Dorset. So does that mean 37 have been placed with neighbouring authorities and further afield, as in the earlier part of 4.5? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's the case. So when children join us and been through the scheme, they obviously get older, and when they're 18, they become care leavers and move in to the scheme. So yes, absolutely. So they've been in those 50 unaccompanied asylum seekers that are now care leavers have been children in our care that have then moved through to become care leavers, and they're eligible for our services by nature of how long they've been with us and the support we've been providing. So absolutely yes, and many of those will have already been placed outside the local area and will have remained there after the time.
Just a quick one, Chairman. Could you tell me what a PA is?
Yeah, personal advisors. So personal advisors are particular groups of professionals that come alongside and work with people that have left care. So it's a particular role within children's services, and they provide a range of support. Not social workers whilst they get older, but a different type of support and help them deliver their independence plan, move forward. So personal advisors.
Well, the only thing that I knew PA stood for was either personal assistant or personal advisor. So.
Councillor Cook, please.
Good morning, and thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Claire, for that very clear report, and the written report was very clear in fairly plain English. Thank you. And really, can I say, first of all, that what a great job the team have done, because actually, if you think back to 18 months ago, what happened in that February was totally unexpected. It might not have been in parts of the world, but certainly in this country, we had to hit the ground running and get something done. And it worked, from my perspective, pretty well. We looked at it last October and we picked through some of the detail then, having experienced 6 months. I'm always interested in the stats, and it's at 2.3 B and C that I just want to ask a couple of questions on. It's good to see that over half have moved into independent accommodation. I think that says something. That says something about what perhaps they felt about life in Dorset as well, which is encouraging. 25% have gone back. That's also quite interesting, considering the situation doesn't seem to have improved over there. However, that's if they feel able to do that, it's really good. I'm interested, is there one thing particularly coming through? You see, there's quite a number there who are being rematched. Now, is there any one particular thing that's coming through for that reason. I know on my patch I had a couple where it wasn't the problem of the family, it was a problem of the remoteness. They just didn't have access to any facilities or infrastructure really. So is there anything that you can give us on that? Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
There have been a whole host of reasons why people have been rematched, transport being one of the biggest ones. So we find lots of people come and do rural North Dorset or rural properties elsewhere where people have bigger properties and more space to be able to provide hosting arrangements. And that was really helpful at the start. But as people have settled here a little bit more and want to be able to find work and get around, transport has become a bit of an issue. So people have been asked and wanting to move to some more urban areas or some of our market towns. Other reasons are just around relationships. Some other people have matched well and looked after each other well, and that worked out. Changes in personal circumstances for hosts on some occasions where it's just not right anymore, but the hosting arrangement is one that the Ukrainian guests want to continue. And some other, small things like wanting to go to different schools or getting new jobs and wanting to move around. So a whole host of reasons, really, and we've been trying to work alongside people to understand the reasons for that and what we can do in terms of the scheme if we needed to do anything else. But a range of different reasons, so no one thing really come through.
No, thank you. That's good, because obviously there is a mix. There's no one particular thing leaping out, and that means we probably did do a good job in the first place in getting the match right from a standing start. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Can I just ask Debbie, did you want to speak at this item? Yeah, that's fine. Could you just introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. Have I got the mic on? I've not done this before. Yes, thank you. I'm Debbie Simmons, and I'm the Chief Nursing Officer for NHS Dorset Integrated Care Board, and I will be attending these meetings to represent health. Is that it? Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'm Debbie Simmons, and I'm the Chief Nursing Officer for the NHS Dorset Integrated Care Board, and attending these meetings going forwards to represent health. And I thank you for the report, Claire. Thank you for the report, Claire. Really helpful. And I just wanted to ask in relation to section 8 of the report. It clearly says that the council works with partners to ensure access to health services. I just wondered whether that was working well, whether there's anything that you needed from my perspective to take back, or thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. Absolutely been really helpful to work alongside your team in a whole range of these issues. One of the things that's been a challenge is the number of children arrive through the unaccompanied asylum-seeking children scheme is making sure we have good and rapid access to independent health assessments. And that can be a challenge for us and for health services because the information we get as children arrive is very limited. So getting them up and running can be quite a challenge. The other challenge for health services is when they're placed outside of the county, and that makes it more difficult as well. So we have been working really closely with your teams around that. It remains a challenge. It remains a challenge for us in terms of timeliness, and we all understand that. But there is good working relationships, and we're working well for that. Access to other health services are the same as for the residents of Dorset. In particular, dentistry is something that comes up quite frequently, and making sure that we can be able to do that. But teams working well together, and our thanks really for coming alongside as the numbers increased over the summer, and look forward to continue to work on that as we go.
Thank you, and thank you for the question, Debbie, and welcome to the committee today. Councillor Rennie.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Molly Rennie, Vice Chairman of the committee. I'd like to make a comment and then a question. I, like Robin, would like to thank the team, not coming from a rural area, but coming from a busy town, Dorchester. We've had a lot of people here in Dorchester, and they have brought so much to us and to our schools. When you talk to the schools, especially the schools you have a relationship with in your ward, you realise how much has come, and to the churches as well. We often use this word community, and I think so many people have moved and settled really well. And I wanted to say a special thank you to Housing, because the work they've done, from my point of view, has been amazing, because it's not the host families that talk to me as a counsellor. It's often the child's school or the workplace where one of the family has managed to find a job, and the workplace are so pleased with them, they want to keep them here in Dorchester, and the children are doing well and they need to be settled. And I want to just say a big thank you and to be taken back to the housing team, how helpful the staff have been and in what they've shared with us that we've been able to share, because the housing team have given really, really good information to the visitor, but sometimes it's hard, it's overwhelming. They go back to their employer, for example, tell them one thing that's slightly different. The employer phones the counsellor and said, can you tell me? And the staff have gone above and beyond during this time. And I think that our visitors have a lot to be thankful here in Dorchester. And I think in a way, this takes me on to the next, it's really is a question. It's the budget pressures on children's services because of the children who are having to be placed elsewhere and the social workers that are having to visit them. And as the child or young person is longer away out of county, they will form their own relationships there as well and not want to move back, move into Dorset because they've found their friendship group. But for us, we want them back because it's the added pressures. And I think I would like, with somehow today, for us to get this into the budget cafes and some money set aside to take the pressures for as we move into the next council year. Because I believe it's a duty that we have to. It is one of our sacred duties. We've got to take them on. And there will be more and more pressure because for a question, do we know when we're in the rota and when it's coming up for us? Oh, Teresa's nodding. Because we can plan for that, but we can't plan for other councils who may not be able to meet their obligations. We've heard just only last week about councils going bankrupt. Councils, even though they will have that duty, that obligation, they just won't be able to do it. And I'm wondering, and I've got no evidence of this, but I'm wondering if there will be this increased pressure for us, oh, Claire's nodding as well, that we'll have to take them. I don't think we are anywhere near being concerned about money, the same as some councils, but if we end up having to take the obligation for another authority, I believe we've got to prepare for it, and we're lucky we've got this advance warning about this because we've seen what's happening in other local authorities. So I'd like members to weave this into the recommendation and to be mindful of this when we go into the budget cafes.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. And just before we leave the Ukraine message, thank you for your messages to housing colleagues. And I know Andrew Billany is here today, and to the other teams that have worked so hard in that space to welcome people who have had their country occupied in an aggressive fashion, and clearly the kind of sense of distress and concern is so important to us that Dorset offers a warm welcome. It's the healthiest way for society to function, isn't it? So really, really powerfully important. Clearly, that's been a separate agreement to the unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. And the unaccompanied asylum-seeking national transfer scheme, as the paper outlines, has been somewhat supercharged during August, and the team have worked so incredibly hard to place those now newly required under the statutory instrument children. That will take us up to 0.1% of our population. We are today, this week, we will be at that level, so we will have 67 children, which is our quota at the present time. But you're absolutely right, many other local authorities are not managing to meet their quota at the present time, and that does mean that we're still seeing children housed in hotels across the country, and particularly in Kent. And that is now an illegal act that is placed on all local authorities, which is why it's so important that we do meet that requirement so that we remain in the right place around that statutory requirement. That does allow us to start planning. It hasn't been very easy to plan during August. I have to say we're taking so many children all at once, and the team and the senior team have worked incredibly hard, including undertaking visits themselves, to make sure that we're compliant.
As we go forward, we expect, obviously, and when those children turn 18, and they do, because mostly they're 16 and 17 when they come to us, they will be backfilled by a further requirement from the National Transfer Scheme, and we get a communication on a weekly basis around that. So we know they're coming, but our requirement is to take them within 5 days, and that's a very quick turnaround, as you understand. There is a cost pressure, which I've been very explicit about, in terms of what's called full cost recovery is actually the money that's deemed to cover the placement costs, but it doesn't in any way cover the requirement to allocate social workers, independent reviewing officers, team managers of those people, etc. And increasingly, we're estimating that to be up to 750k, and that's clearly an ongoing burden and an ongoing pressure. I am campaigning through our Association of Directors of Children's Services, and Matt's campaigning through the LGA and others to make sure that that new additional burden is funded from central government. That's an ongoing debate, but clearly it's an additional burden across the country. We're not expecting this to slow down anytime soon, and in fact we might find the 0.1% of the population is raised. That's the reality. It was 0.7 previously, so we may well find that's where we'll get to. We will take our quota to ensure that we operate legally, but we wouldn't be offering to do any more than that at this time. We have been requested to. Kent has requested if we can send staff people. They clearly have a massive challenge. We're not in a position to do that at the present time, whilst we're also doing lots of sector-led improvement work with other local authorities in our own region. We will have conversations with the DFE and the Home Office to look at any creative solutions that we might find that would benefit the young people and the council. But beyond that, we are in a position of taking our quota, attempting to offer suitable service to those young people who also bring fabulous skills and fabulous ability to our communities, whether they're here or away.
Councillor Kimber?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Paul Kimber, Portland. Thank you for the debate and thank you for that oversight of just what we can and cannot afford. I think that is particularly important. If I could just say one lesson I've learned over the last 2 months is the people of Dorset have got a big, big heart for humanity and care. And that has seemed to have overridden and fought against many of the oppositions that you might, well, we dread to think that are around. But it's just a point is that care and humanity is really there. And it's always been there. I mean, right from the beginning of the last war, I remember my family taking in children from Europe. So I just wondered what happens when we can't afford it anymore? Where do we cut in? We just say, I wouldn't like for us as a council to be in a position and say, no, on your way, we can't afford it anymore. But it's that humanity that's come through. Thank you.
If I can just come in on that, it's interesting because I hadn't really known an awful lot about this group of young children who were coming on the boats and are coming in as unaccompanied children. But I was really touched by some of the stories, not only in here, but some of the stories that are around. These are just kids. They're 17, 16-year-olds who are just looking for a good future. They're not interested in wrecking the place. Just ignore everything that is on social media. They do not want to wreck the place. They just want an education. They want to live here. They want to take part in society. And I find it really sad that we've got 67 of them coming to Dorset at the moment, or are housed in Dorset, or housed by Dorset, and we're struggling to find foster carers for them. This is a plea, yet again, for more foster carers, because these kids are absolutely delightful. They just want an education. They're not pains in the neck. So just a shout to anybody who's out there listening, if they can think in their hearts to put some of these kids up, it would be so much better for them to be here and for them to form their own community here. Can I go over, as I think, did somebody want to comment on Councillor Kimber's statement?
Thank you. So the funding streams have been outlined in the paper. There clearly was funding for the UK piece, and that's been very well supported, I think, nationally. The Syrian resettlement scheme was funded too, and the US scheme is funded. What our challenge is it's not fully funded, and that's the kind of conversation we need to keep having. But it is a legal requirement for us to undertake this. So the kind of choice option is, do we not be legal, or do we take our requirement of young people and continue to have the debate around finances? And my strong advice to you as Director of Children's Services is you always remain legal.
Councillor Quayle. Sorry, can I just ask you to introduce yourself, because you're not actually on this committee, but I'm happy to have you.
He can't get into his microphone.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Byron Quell, Blandford Forum and portfolio holder for Children's Services. I had hoped to come in towards the end to mention a few things, but I think I'll also respond to the point Councillor Kimber has just made. The simple fact about when money runs out, I don't see it as that's how it works. This council is managed so that we provide, and as Teresa Levy mentioned, that we stay legal, and that's every intention of Cabinet and the leader of this council, and certainly my intention in Children's Services. With the good work that Teresa and her officers do, we'll ensure that that absolutely happens. So I think that's the conversation we'll be having, as opposed to the way it was put earlier. Turning back to the initial bit that I actually wanted to say, Chairman. Firstly, on the first part of the report, which isn't under my portfolio, but I thought I would mention the Homes for Ukraine and the resettlement. We were very fortunate in Dorset about the outpouring of support, as has been mentioned by a number of councillors. And that support, even in Blandford, I mean, just the other day we had a cultural day. It was a Ukrainian cultural day, and it was a fantastically supported event. And all of this goodwill, the link between the goodwill and what the residents of Dorset want to do has clearly been our officers who've managed such a complex undertaking. And I know other councillors have thanked them, but I'd like to thank them for that as well. One thing the report doesn't mention when looking at the unaccompanied asylum seekers, children, and is the extraordinary amount of work that officers do. I know, again, Claire Shields mentioned that a lot of work has been done, but that is an underestimation of the amount of work, the out of hours, the weekend phone calls, children arriving at last minute. And in particularly, I would like to thank all the officers in Children's Services who deal with this, because they have turned a corner in dealing with the amount of young children that are coming into Dorset. And clearly, as was mentioned earlier, so it's fantastic to do this, to have the service and to see our officers produce such fantastic outcomes for these young people. That's at the top of our agenda, absolutely. And as Teresa Levy said, yes, there's cost pressures. It's been managed well. Thank you very much to the service. We have a moral obligation and also a legal obligation, and that's every intention that we'll continue to do that.
Thank you. Right. Just coming to the recommendations now, I think. What I'd like to do is put the first recommendation in, which basically reflects what Councillor Quayle has just said. And I'd like that to be that members of the committee are content with the progress made on refugee settlements and homes for Ukraine, and acknowledge the excellent work done by our council officers in support of people who have had to leave their country for whatever reason. Is that okay for a first recommendation?
Would somebody recommend?
I'll propose it. Yeah, okay. Second. Are we all content with that as the first recommendation? Yeah, okay. The second one, I'd like to bring something forward about funding, because basically we are always short of money. As these schemes all go forward, it puts more and more pressure on housing. So I think housing need to be supported a lot more. We have limited numbers of houses in Dorset, and we use them incredibly well. There's already been comments from various people about how housing have bent over backwards to help. Just for the people looking in, this isn't always social housing. In fact, it's not very often social housing. So these people are not taking the housing from people who are on the housing list. So please don't get that idea. We're looking at really creative ways of increasing housing stock for these people who basically benefit our county by so much and should be welcomed. What I want to do is to suggest to Cabinet, I think we need to take it to Cabinet, that we increase the funding allocation for supporting asylum seekers and the whole, I don't know how to describe them as a group, the whole group, anyway, the Homes for Ukraine, the Ukrainians, the resettlement scheme. Okay, so increase the funding for the resettlement scheme because there's big pressures not only on housing but also on children's when these unaccompanied minors pass 18. It's going to cause us a real problem. We need more money, therefore we need more allocated. So when we're going into the budget cafes this year, I want to make sure that is within the budgets. So if the first one on this part can be an increase in the funding allocation for both capital investment for housing and also for something investment for children, day-to-day running investment for children's services, for staffing, etc., for this.
I'd be happy to propose that.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. Would you all be happy with that? Yeah.
Is this a further recommendation that you're introducing to this report, apart from the recommendation that we've just already passed?
Yes, this is the second recommendation. The first recommendation is around thanking staff for all the really excellent work they've done. The second recommendation for me is a request that goes to Cabinet to increase funding, both capital funding and day-to-day funding for the resettlement schemes.
Is it possible that you could give us the exact form of words that you intend to use as to for this recommendation to Cabinet, please?
Have you got them, George? There. I've amended it slightly from, yeah, okay. If you could read it out, please. Okay. The committee requests of Cabinet that there is an increase in funding allocation for the resettlement programmes, both for capital and day-to-day running, to cover the additional costs required for housing and for children's services, which aren't fully funded from government. Yep, you're going to move that.
I'll second. You've got Jane and then you've got Robin.
Councillor Somper.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Councillor Somper, Beacon Ward, and Cabinet Member for Adult Social Care, Health and Housing. I think you've actually more or less answered the question following Councillor Pipe's question. I wanted to be really clear about what that ask was in the housing area. I think some of this will fall under the temporary housing area. I think that's the key point.
Yes, it will be for the temporary housing scheme that we had, that we ran some of them earlier on this year, and it's evident that we're going to need more.
Thank you very much. That is clearer, and obviously work is ongoing in this area anyway. Also, we are setting up the Housing Board, where a lot of these issues will be discussed. As far as funding goes, I think that's another conversation, and as you say, that part of our budget setting process. I appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it needs to go into our budget process, but what I don't want it to do is to get lost, because the budget process is so complex for a council this size. Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Robin Cook, Stour and Allen Vale Ward. I don't want to appear to sound like Mr. Nasty, please, but seriously, I get your sentiment. I think the members here get the sentiment of what you're saying, but I'm not quite sure whether what we're asking here is quite as clear as it needs to be. We haven't got any detail in terms of figures to go on that we can ask for this money. I think if we're going to word it, I think the wording that George read out actually did clarify it a little more, but I'd like to see the word appropriately funded in there. And also, we've got to bear in mind that it's not long, actually, now, before we have the budget cafes, where all the members will have a chance to input and perhaps put pressure on when the decisions come further down the line, because this committee, again, will be looking at that following the budget cafes anyway. So I think those are the avenues. I don't think there's any reason why we shouldn't flag it up with Cabinet, but I don't think it's something we can... I think appropriately funded in future would be a suitable wording. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's how I'd like to see it. Thank you.
Yes, I'm happy to accept that. So is Councillor Kimber. Just a moment, Councillor Rennie.
Thank you. I take your point, and yeah, I think appropriate is the right word. I don't think we're actually asking Cabinet to give us any more money now. And initially, when I brought this subject up during the questioning, I did mention budget cafes and next year's budget, because my consciousness around this was because of the obligation and the duty and what may happen to us as a result of what could happen to other authorities in the future. And we'll all be sitting around discussing everything that we want to do and our dreams, but this is a reality. So I was, I think, trying to drop the thought into minds because the budget cafes are coming up. And I think maybe not maybe, we're all very mindful that we've got these dates in our diary. Thank you.
I think Councillor O'Leary was next.
Yes, thank you. I'm much more happier with appropriately funded, because I was a bit concerned around the vagueness of it. So I think if it's appropriately funded, I'm happy to support that.
Thank you. Councillor Pipe.
Thank you, Chairman. As has already been said by Councillor O'Leary and Councillor Cook, I'm quite happy with what they've said. And if you could preface your recommendation with reference to the budget cafes and the setting of the budget, which we'll do in February next year, I'm sure that'll go a long way to getting what you want. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can you just read out where we've got to, George, please? Or do you want me to read out again? He's just slopey-shouldered. No, he's not. That was extremely rude of me. The committee requests of Cabinet. Do we need to go to Cabinet? I think we probably do.
In advance.
Okay, yeah, we do need to go to Cabinet Okay, it does need to go to Cabinet, so we can recommend to the portfolio holder officially that it needs to be within the budget cafe. The portfolio holder, it's all right. You okay? Yeah, she's fine.
No, she wants to speak.
Just a question, Chair, then. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. So to be clear, this will go to the budget cafe and then obviously on forward to Cabinet and then on to full council finally. Ooh.
I think it needs to go to Cabinet first for them to be aware that through the budget cafes and the budget setting process, that this will be a request coming from the Scrutiny Committee, that we are asking for more funding for this. So it does need to go through Cabinet first to make them aware.
There's there's a cabinet paper after the budget cafes. Obviously, I'm here today as the portfolio that is responsible for housing and have heard everything that's been said today. So I will be taking this through budget discussions, then forward through to the budget cafe, which then goes on to cabinet, which then goes on to full council. So these comments will be wrapped up in that.
Good work, I think, because the budget cafe is next week, isn't it? So we haven't got a cabinet meeting in the interim. Therefore, yeah, if you could bear in mind the recommendations of this committee, that would be really useful. Are we okay? Councillor and Councillor O'Leary, Councillor Kimber.
Yes, Chair. Thank you. I mean, what this is moving, it recognises the urgency of the situation. I mean, we've already had reports from our officers about the Syrians and now the Ukrainians, and I think there will be more. And it's a question of, as I've said before, the humanity of what we're doing, and that needs to be expressed. I believe, as I've said earlier on, I've learned a tremendous lot about the good of Dorset people and just how caring we are. And as has already been said in the debate, most towns and villages, and I know my own one, has spent a great deal of time raising funds, helping Ukrainians, and so we should. Thank you.
Can I just have clarification? We need to change the recommendation slightly as it's not going to go to Cabinet now. So if we can put the committee requests of the portfolio holder that an increase in funding in the allocation for the resettlement programme, both for capital and ongoing expenses, are requested in the forthcoming budget setting process. Sorry. You wanted an increase in, how did you word it? An appropriate increase. Thank you. Is that it? Okay. If you can read it out, because this will be for the minutes.
So the potential wording that you could possibly use is to recommend to the portfolio holder that the funding for the resettlement scheme and day-to-day resettlement costs within children's services are appropriately funded during the budget setting process.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so obviously this crosses the two directorates here. So we have children's area and obviously housing. So it's crossing the two. So it's sorry to speak for colleague, but it's the two areas which are being covered here. I mean, it's the report actually, although it's in children's services, obviously there's this overlap into housing. So I think that's clear. I hope.
Okay, so if we can put an S after the portfolio holders. And I think we're there then. Okay, so I've got Councillor Kimber had proposed. I'm happy to second. Could we have a vote on this one, please? Oh, that's magic. That's all in favour. Okay, thank you very much. Phew, I think we've got there. Right. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for everyone who's taken place in this debate. No, I'm not going to. Can we move on to the next item now, which is the, where are we? Just go down. Yeah, okay. Right, so on to the next agenda item, which is the registered providers of housing, of social housing, a review of the work of 5 housing associations operating within the Dorset Council area. Approximately, I'll just do an opening introduction as the chair of this working group. Approximately 2 years ago, this working group was set up to review the registered providers who have properties in Dorset. There are a large number of registered providers in Dorset, many of them dealing with specific groups of residents, which are quite small. I was quite amazed just how many we've got spread across Dorset. As the small providers generally have minimum interactions with Dorset Council, it was decided we should concentrate on the 4 largest registered providers who have frequent dealings with the council. That is Astor, Magna, Sovereign and Abri. Now, I'm sure most of you will have heard of Astor, Magna and Sovereign because they're the big boys that have been around for quite a while now. But I've included Abri in this because Abri is a relatively new provider who's moving into Dorset, and they've got plans and capacity to expand. So they've got really big, ambitious plans for Dorset, so I thought that would be really useful to bring them in. I've also included East Borough Housing because I didn't want to totally ignore the small providers, and I think probably all of us will know East Borough Housing. They are actually part of the Astor group now, but they still do stay very much as an independent group. The working group had a huge brief, actually. We had quite a roving brief, and we condensed it down into a number of questions that we've outlined in the paper. Astor, Magna, Sovereign, Abri and East Borough were all contacted and invited to take part in this scrutiny. Subsequently, they were sent the questions and asked to fill them in and return with any information that they wanted to give us. They sent us back shed loads. They were really keen to engage in this process and I was really heartened by their responses and how they really, really wanted to work with the council. This gave us we then invited them in for face-to-face discussions based on these questions so we could explore in more depth issues that they were bringing up, ideas that they were bringing up. The findings of these discussions and our recommendations are presented today. Andrew Billany has very kindly supported this group and has written the paper before you. I'd like to thank him for his input into this, which has been huge. I would also like to extend my thanks to the working group, which was, Councillor Rennie, Councillor Dunseith and myself. Councillor Dunseith is no longer on scrutiny, but she was very willing to carry on with this work. So a special thanks to her. What was clear was that the RPs were all committed to working with Dorset Council through our housing allocations and our improvements teams, and also through planning, with regard to the RPs' ambitious plans that they all had to increase the affordable housing and shared ownership within Dorset, which was really good to hear. We also asked them about communications with their tenants, because this is one thing that we regularly get as councillors. And it was really heartening to hear the way that they were now responding. I think this has improved a lot over the last few years, probably since the legislation has changed, that they've really focused on this. But a lot of the tenants are now part of the decision-making processes for their organisations, which was great. We were also very heartened by the way they talked about the way they dealt with their comments, the tenants' comments that were coming in, and also the complaints procedures that were in place. I've been around a few years, and it really has improved since I was first a councillor. There's a lot of good work done during this scrutiny, and I think there's a lot of work that could come out of it. But I think we need to be very mindful of the length of this council and how much work we want to do. So I'd like to thank the working group for their time and their commitment to doing this. I'd like to hand over now, if I can, to either Councillor Somper or the officer who's helped lead with this, Andrew Billany. I'm going over to Councillor Somper, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Chairman, you'll know that when I held the role that you currently hold as Chairman of Scrutiny, it was something that I was pressing for. So I was obviously very pleased when you had finally got to this point, which shows how hard it is. I mean, it's fantastic work in here, much of which I agree with and would have been asking very similar questions. So I just wanted to thank the Task and Finish group for the work, but also to the officers who put in many hours to advise, assist and help. I know that Andrew Billany will want to comment, but I just wanted to thank you, and just to make that point, I'm very pleased you finally got there.
Thank you. If I can hand over to Andrew Billany, if you could introduce yourself as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Andrew Billany. I'm the Corporate Director for Housing and Community Safety. And thank you for the opportunity to work on this project. One thing I wanted to stress also, because the interviews are ongoing, interviews were last year, for quite a while ago. The report states a lot of commitments to do certain things. Pretty much all of those are in train and being done. So I would thank the panel for helping enhance the work that we already do with housing associations and improve it genuinely. So certainly some of those, so for example, the point about having a dedicated place to discuss development and planning issues, that's something that's started and has been very useful, just to make sure we're having those detailed in one place conversations about issues around the nutrient neutrality issue in planning, for example. So that's clearly an issue of concern for housing associations because they want to develop new homes. The thing I'd just also stress as well, just as a sort of bringing it bang up to date, you will all know in this chamber that we're out to consultation on the housing strategy at the moment. So registered provider sessions are also being held to make sure we're getting continuing engagement with them to bring their expertise and thoughts to how we develop our housing strategy. So that's pretty important. And I think it's been a good step forward having those, the exercise we did through this scrutiny, these scrutiny sessions, because it got them, I think it shifted them closer to our world and where we're going as an authority. And last thing I'll just pull out, because there are, again, there are very, apart from the points that you often hear me talk about, the shortage of available housing and the increased numbers of people coming to us potentially homeless or in need. That is obviously our high priority, but there are other priorities as well, which were very much a theme of the discussions, and that's, for example, damp and mould in existing properties, about what they're doing to make sure that tenants are well served and living in good quality, safe and sound homes. That's a feature, and there's been an announcement only last week from Michael Gove announcing new measures coming through around ensuring that landlords of all sorts are keeping their properties free from damp and mould. And the other thing I'll also say as well is around the decarbonisation agenda. There's given that the social housing stock is in the hands of housing associations, look into what they're doing to insulate homes, provide energy efficient boilers, etc. That's very much a feature of these discussions and our ongoing work. And I'd say there's a double win in working on that. There's a decarbonisation, but also making sure fuel bills are kept down for people who are struggling with other budgets. So the main one thing I wanted to say today was just to say this has been a very useful exercise, part of ongoing work, and keep that relationship tight with the housing associations.
Thank you. Can I go to the committee for questions, please? Councillor O'Leary.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Louis O'Leary, Littlemore and Preston Ward. The Littlemore part of my ward has a high level of social housing tenants. The main providers in my ward are Astor, Sage, Abbury, and a few other smaller ones. I think Abbury in particular is a really good example of a really good housing association. They are deeply involved in the community. They're putting new solar panels on a number of houses, replacing old windows, doors. They're absolutely fantastic. I cannot fault them. And I think that a medium-sized housing association provider like Abbury are really, really good. What concerns me are some of the really smaller housing associations that lack adequate resources, I find, to actually deal with issues. They're very hard to get hold of in some cases. And on the other side, you've got large housing associations that I find do not give good, decent enough regard to the position elected members actually hold. I have a huge amount of casework relating to social housing tenants. I was told some years ago that I could no longer directly contact Astor officers. I have to go through, because I was sending them too many emails, I have to send them to a central inbox. It goes to somebody up the line, they pass it around, it comes back to me, and we have to go through all that rigmarole. That's fine. But what I find with certain large housing associations is, if I didn't bother emailing them, getting in contact with them, raising issues with them, would they ever bother with me as an elected member on the ground? And I frankly think, no, they wouldn't. You know, I think Astor pay very good. Astor is one of them. You know, there's other large housing associations. I won't just single them out, but I find there are a number of large housing associations that pay lip service to the top. You know, directors and cabinet members and all this and all that, and you know, really good close working relationships, very friendly. You know, this, but on the ground, I find this a bit of a different relationship sometimes. I would actually like to see some of these people in front of a committee like this in public and ask some quite challenging questions. Astor, for instance, is selling off ex-council houses, you know, decent old council houses, because they're allegedly too expensive to redevelop. They're selling them, and in my opinion, they're not replacing like for like. They are changing the demographics of an area by doing that. And I'm deeply concerned around some of the things that some of our registered providers are doing and the attitude some of them have. And that is because housing is the biggest issue by far in my ward. So those are some of the issues I do have. I do think, you know, it is good to have the working group, and I really do thank you for that work that yourselves and Councillor Dunsey did. And it was interesting looking at those things. But I just feel sometimes we're going and asking them when actually sometimes it should actually be they come to us.
Thank you. Sorry, Andrew, would you like to respond on that one? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor O'Leary. I mean, several things brought up there, but I think I'm glad you reminded everybody around the number of smaller housing associations, because there are 52 within our Dorset Council area, so it is a large range. And it was worth mentioning that, because some of those smaller ones aren't as well set up to do that. Exactly that, what you've described. So I think that's certainly something we have in mind about making sure we're providing the right support to those housing associations, but also being pressing them if they're failing their tenants. So I think that point's well made. The other thing, I know you've raised several points, but the other thing is around selling of empty properties. Just to reassure members, that's probably the most robust area of our liaison meetings, where we do discuss regularly with housing associations when they're proposing to sell a property, whether that's justified or not. In broadest terms, if a home is very expensive to maintain, if it's in poor condition, the housing association will often sell that property and recycle the proceeds to build new. And one thing I'll say in defence of that approach is they build far more than they sell, and that's part of the way they finance that, is by selling some homes. The robust part of our conversation is we recognise, from a council perspective, sometimes if that's the only house in a village or a small town, or one of, say, 10 social housing homes, that has a disproportionate impact. So we do have firm conversations where to make sure it's not not a rigid approach to sales. So I'm trying to give some assurance that we do have firm conversations on that topic.
Would you like to come back?
Yes. In regards to selling properties, if you sell an ex-council house on an ex-council estate and then use that money to fund the construction of housing in another location, what you tend to end up doing, and I talk from personal experiences growing up on a council estate and a housing estate and knowing there are negatives to living on a housing estate. There are issues around them, but there are immense benefits. I pride the fact that my community is a community still, and that is largely around the type of housing within that community. And when you start moving these houses out of those areas and start shipping them away and then start mixing them up in other developments, what you end up doing is you end up stopping that. And that's what really concerns me. You change housing estates from those communities and they end up changing, and that is concerning me. I mean, I'm terrible about change. I don't like change at all. Not a lot of us do. But I mean, there's good change and there's bad change, and I'm concerned that there's a lot of it is bad change. And the houses that they are selling are not always the same quality, I find, to the houses they are building. I know we can't go back to the days where we were building houses with huge gardens and like that. We used to have the house I grew up in and whatnot. But we can do better, and I think they can do better.
Okay, thank you. I think one of the problems is some of these houses are really hard to let, which is one of the reasons they sell them off, to be quite honest. Hard to let houses. Because tenants don't want them. Certainly in some of the rural areas, and I would never object to them selling off. I mean, I've known of housing associations having inherited things like Grade 2 listed, which, as a landlord, they should be getting rid of those for a pastime, as long as they're reinvesting in the local area. Councillor Brown?
Thank you, Chair. This won't surprise Andrew that on this subject I feel very passionately, because we communicate on a very regular basis about this. So I represent a very rural ward, and what we are finding, particularly in Sixpenny Hanley, which we're very fortunate to have a good handful of housing association properties, is what feels like a systematic disposal of that estate by a particular Astor-based housing association, who will remain nameless, to then dispose of those properties, to buy them then in the same locality, which they describe as Wimborne. Well, the problem we're having there is we're removing that stock from an area which has a housing waiting list. So I would just really encourage the council to push back on the narratives, that yarn that is being spun, because the evidence and the data is not there to support it. And the question I would ask is, if a house has got to a position where it is no longer tenable to, and I quote, bring up to a rentable standard, why was someone renting it out in the first place? How did the housing association, how are they allowed to get a property to the point in which it is uneconomical to bring it back to a rentable standard while having a sitting tenant in it? And I'm sorry, Chair, you can hear the frustration in my voice about this, because it just feels that the housing associations are a law unto themselves, and we have no power over it. And I don't hold our officers or our team responsible for the fact that we don't have the powers, in my mind, to adequately regulate them. But I talked to our local Member of Parliament, and he feels exactly the same. And we also have a particular housing association which just seems to have a complete disregard to these kind of constructive conversations. Whereas, I pull on the example of some of the smaller and medium-sized ones that are really keen to engage and be responsible landlords. And, in the olden days, we called them social properties. And I think the key there was in the name. This is about providing a social good. And that doesn't just mean providing a rentable property at an affordable rate. It means providing it in the right place. And rural communities deserve that just as much as urban ones do. And then we wonder why all of our young people are so often being priced out of our rural communities. So there isn't a question there. It is just pushing back on some of the assumptions that I think have been said this morning. And I guess if there is a question is, what can we do as a council to try and get powers to actually hold some of these larger housing associations to account and provide on the social aspect of their social service?
Thank you. I know Councillor Pipe wants to come in and Councillor at the front wants to come in. I would... Poor Councillor Kimber, sorry. Yeah, it's just my name. Can I just go over to housing for some clarification? Because I don't think you have local connections to villages. I think they're larger areas than that. But could you just clarify how local connections work within the rural setting, please?
It's complicated. It depends on the local lettings plan. So there are occasionally local lettings plans which start with a local connection to a village and then broaden out. If there are, if there's no one available for that property in a particular village. Can I make a different point, Councillor Taylor, just around, whilst no surprise, that's partly why I said conversations are robust, the points that you just made. But there's glimmers of good news in terms of new developments. The Oakford Fitzpaine development that's been done, the Council Somper helped open. That's an example of a new development on the edge of a small town, which I think has been a village, in fact. Sorry, so my knowledge of Oakford Fitzpaine, but it's a good example of 19 homes. Many of those low-cost home ownership for local, and it's I think almost all of them have gone for to local people from the village. So there are examples of where the recycling of that money does create new homes in rural areas, and we've had some good publicity around Rural Housing Week last month, where there's been a few other schemes where the new schemes have been quite good in that sense.
Thank you. Councillor Pipe, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Pipe, Richardson Upton. I've read the report and I think it's a good report, and I thank Andrew and yourselves and Councillor Jean Dunseith for the work that you've actually put into it, and my colleague Councillor Somper for her input as the portfolio holder. Although this report seems to be about the relationship between Dorset Council and let's say that the larger housing providers, I don't think it goes into any great detail when I refer to F here on page 27 of how member involvement can be improved. I have 5 providers on my patch. By far the largest is Astor. I will mention, Madam Chairman, Upton Heath Estate, which is an estate of approximately 120 mainly prefabricated homes in Upton. It's been up and standing for 45, 50 years. But on a visit last Tuesday, not connected with this meeting today, I was called in by a number of residents. We actually got together and they showed me a lot of things that really shouldn't be happening if they want to enjoy a healthy lifestyle in their homes. For instance, vegetation has been allowed to grow up walls, and where that vegetation is on the insides, because these are prefabricated, you get that shape, the outline of the vegetation which is growing on the outside, on the inside as a damp area. Now, Astor don't seem to want to do anything about it. The place is riddled with fly tipping. I picked up 7 used needles on Tuesday. The maintenance of the estate, the gardens and the facilities, the seats is minimal. I've pictures on my telephone of the seats in the seating area, which are all overgrown by stinger nettles and ivy. The contactability of Astor is 0. Or almost 0, but when you do get through to them, you get cut off. And I think there's a divide between the tenants of Astor and the residents. And by resident, I mean people who've bought their properties and are not beholden to Astor or any other provider for rental income. They don't want to help them at all. I find that absolutely amazing. And I've got a contact number here. It's an 077 number for Astor. And I dare you to tell me to ring it and see how long it rings for, because it will never get answered. Almost, yes, thank you, Councillor O'Leary. Almost on a positive note, on most days there are 3 Astor vans parked on Palmerston Road, which adjoins the Upton Heath estate, which I find quite positive, until you go and look at the vans, which are full of gentlemen drinking tea and smoking, no matter what time of the day you go by. And talking to residents, they don't actually see these people on the estate. So I don't actually know what their purpose is. And it's already been said, I think Councillor Leary's already said it, some of the larger housing providers just provide lip service. And I'm afraid this is one of them. And it would have been nice, actually, and that's already been said, to have actually had representatives from the housing providers here today to answer questions along a similar line to what you've heard from me today. But as for a report, I think it's rather good, but we need to get more contact, dedicated contact lines to local members, because residents are getting fed up not being able to contact them. The local members are getting fed up not being able to contact them. And all you can do is go back and say, they're not answering the phone. They're not answering emails. I don't think it's good enough, quite frankly. Thank you, Chairman.
Can I just come back on a different take on Astor? I'm Western Ward. I've got a huge amount of Astor houses in my ward. I've got a lot of supported housing that is Astor. And I have to say, I get really good responses from them. I emailed, just as an example, I sent 3 emails to their inquiry box on Friday morning, and by Friday afternoon I had 3 replies. That is the sort of information that I'm getting. I'm having information about, certainly within the sheltered housing, on what their plans are, what they're doing, maintenance work that they're doing. They are coming to me and telling me what they are doing. I do take a probably slightly different tack to other councillors in that I do regard them as being individual companies, and it's up to them to run their tenancies. I don't go to private landlords and complain, or I wouldn't consider doing that unless absolutely necessary. What I do, though, is enable my residents to be able to complain for themselves. So when they come to me, the first thing I always ask is, have you put this in as a complaint? What is your complaint number? And what have they said they are going to do with it? Because I've quite often find that people would prefer to come to councillors and complain than go to Astor or any of the other providers. This is just my experience in my ward. So my first point of call is always, what have you done? And if they've done nothing, then I won't take it on as a piece of ward work, because I don't think that is our job. It's not our job to be the meat in the sandwich between the registered provider. And it was interesting because I had a phone call on housing last week. No, I won't go into it. If I can just go over, I don't know whether Andrew Billany has got any comment you would like to make on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I can do. I'm just on after the meeting, I think I said in a paper that would circulate the various ways of that the housing association have said they want, that they propose to be contacted. I think there is, I think as stung by comments around Astor, I think Astor have improved quite a lot in terms of that councillor inquiry inbox that they've set up. I mean, I'm not here to support them necessarily, but I think they have that we get weekly. It's been running for about 6 weeks, so there are weekly reports of all the councillor inquiries that go into that inbox with answers. So that seems like a step forward, just to defend them slightly. So I'd encourage every councillor to use that when necessary, and we'll keep talking to, it's a regular feature in our liaison meetings with them anyway, so make sure we keep customer contact as effective and efficient as possible. And partly your point, Councillor Taylor, is a better solution, I think, for everybody, is that the problem is solved straight away with a first point of contact, and there's no need to go to a councillor. But if they do, we're trying to get that communication as streamlined as possible. So I'll circulate after the meeting the various what they've come back saying the best way for councillors to contact them in those circumstances. That makes sense. But certainly that we push them very hard on making sure there is that first point of contact efficiency, so people get their repairs done and their neighbour disputes dealt with straight away.
Councillor Kimber.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Paul Kimber, Portland. And yes, Astor and Magna are probably the biggest housing associations in and around the island. And if this debate has achieved anything today that we do, and I go along with our friends over on my left, we do need a better dialogue with with our housing associations. It wouldn't take much to just to break down that wall. I do have to say that East Borough Housing Association does send me a great big report every year, fantastic report, a glossy report of what they're doing, what their expectations are, and how they do it. And I'm always quite pleased. I know they're only a very small one, but they do make sure that they are approachable within the telephone. And yes, you're dead right. It's very, very difficult at times to liaise with Astor. Magna, I find, are not too bad. I will email them because tenants will come to us still as councillors because they're not getting their repair done, or something, or some behaviour on the estate is not getting settled, or is not being dealt with. And we as councillors, that's when we usually come in. And of course, the big problems are that we've got such a massive amount of people on our housing waiting list. I think I'm told the other day that it was over 6,000 now. Perhaps Andrew might be able to give us the latest stats. But we need really to, all the time that we're going to have these massive numbers, and the numbers are increasing. They're not going down at all. And this is where I find it's the future of our housing can be pretty frightening, because we got young people that cannot afford to buy a home. Now, we may say there's several initiatives, but we're still fighting off the right to buy, what that did, and it wrecked our housing stock. I wanted to make one point. I wish we could have put a reference into housing co-ops as a provider. I know I'm not sure whether we've tried to go out and approach housing co-ops, because they're the ones that can encourage people to get together. We've got to realise that people, during our democratic processes, people on our estates can get together. People can put forward ideas. Another point I wanted to raise, I was on the Weymouth and Portland Housing Company when it first started, and it was a bitter pill to swallow at times. We had to sell a house, but when we sold that house, the finance of it almost quadrupled of the greater good that it did. I didn't want to see houses lost, former council houses lost to the private sector or being sold, but I think there was a time where I saw done the greater good. I think I've just about dealt with it, but we do need a bit of democracy in this, because we're the ones at the sharp end that people are going to say, I need a house, help. Thank you.
Councillor O'Leary.
Yeah, the issue of housing really worries me, because I often find myself either in agreement or the left of Paul Kimber. I think that one thing, well, the wider housing issue, in my opinion, in this country and in this county, and I'll be making my views known in the housing consultation, will not be solved until the government, via local authorities, start building houses again. That is the only way I can actually see the issue being dealt with. And where I will disagree with Councillor Kimber is on right to buy, for instance. I think right to buy is a wonderful thing. My dear old nan would never have owned a thing in her life if it wasn't for that. And, you know, I would defend that to the day I die, right to buy. What was wrong, I believe, and we are only a minority of local authorities that have done it, is by transferring our stock over to unaccountable and unelected housing providers. Councillor Kimber talked about the old Weymouth and Portland Housing Board. There used to be councillors on that. There used to be councillors on the boards of housing associations. They have all, over the last number of years, been removed. And now we find that these large, and they are charities, they're not private companies, they are charities. We find that they are now so unaccountable and so distant that they are more or less allowed to do what they want. I don't feel that they consider us on an even level and on the same playing field as them. And I can't see the situation actually being dealt with until we realign our relationship at the top, at the bottom. I mean, one thing, I mean, I've got a sheltered accommodation unit in my ward. There's a big debate around service charges for that. I arranged a meeting with Asta. Asta eventually did come down and send a representative, spoke to residents, and then when I chased them up for a response, they completely ignored me and said they wouldn't be informing me of the decision, they'd be writing directly to their tenants. That's fine. You know, I understand that. But then you could also email me as well, as the elected member and as the person who arranged the meeting, instead of having to go to a tenant, because that just makes us like a bunch of idiots. Well, actually, we are elected members, and I think they need to understand that we have a role, we get it in the neck, and at the end of the day, we built most of these houses when they were a local authority, and I just think it's a damn shame that we no longer have control over it.
I think if I can just come in, just my comment on that is that the housing associations are independent companies. We work with them, they're our partners. I wouldn't expect to have a councillor on the board of British Rail. I wouldn't expect to have a councillor on the board of the Co-op, which is another similar organisation, or of Sainsbury's or anything else. These are independent companies, and I think there is a legacy of when they were publicly owned, but the houses are not publicly owned in this area anymore. There are still councils that have council areas that still have council housing and run council housing, and that is another huge debate that we could have at some time. But the bottom line is, these are companies that own houses and rent to tenants. They work with us as they are registered providers, but in some respects, they're not that much different from private landlords. And if you think, certainly in Weymouth, there's as much private landlords as there are social landlords. And I think that, to me, the problems are worse within the private sector than they are within this sector, simply because we work a lot better with the RPs. Who was next?
John and then Robin.
Councillor Orrell.
Thank you, Chair. John Orrell and Melcombe Regis. I'll pick up that last point. Yes, my ward is back-to-back Victorian housing, privately owned. So I don't have the same problems you have with social providers, because I hardly got any. But I do have a lot of problems with people looking for housing and in very poor quality housing, and they're desperate to live somewhere decent. So my particular concern is the number of new builds. And I notice on page 24, some of the points there, point number 2, commitment to developing new homes, which I do applaud them for increasing the number year on year, but I have to say taking a step back, the number of new homes is not enough by at least a factor of 10. It's great that new homes are being built in these villages, and I see the photographs and the press releases, but it's just not enough. We should have a press release like that every day, not once a month. So the commitment to building new homes and looking at the recommendation we're asked to adopt, page 24, in the headlines, it's an eagerness to speed up the process of developing new homes. Absolutely. And the recommendation we're asked to consider is feeding into the housing strategy. So again, that's the bit I'd like to pick up, particularly picking up Councillor Leary's point of while the debate I couldn't participate in, I was looking at the figures for house building for since the war. And since the war to 1980, there was private housing, council housing in equal measure, and the houses were affordable. Since 1980, council housing ceased, private buildings stayed about the same, and the amount of these agencies, these housing associations, are building a fraction of the of council houses, and it's just not enough. And what we've seen then is the price skyrocket, so our local hard-working families, young people cannot afford to buy a house. So we've got to get a step change in what is delivered by housing associations, and if they're not up to the job, we need to be going out to housing trusts, community land trusts, and letting people self-build. And that's where we filled into the housing strategy. So the report is great, but we just need to remember that bigger context. We're just not building enough. Thanks.
If I can just come back on that one, we had a lot of discussions about how we could. Yes, I totally agree with you. You're absolutely spot on right. But what we need to do is, as well as the possibility of building ourselves, which is up in the air, what we need to do is to push these RPs to build more, as you said. And we asked all of them those questions, why don't you build more? And they've all got ambitious plans to build. What they said was that it actually takes quite a long time to get it through the planning process. And that was every single one of them said that without being prompted. They talked about the planning process as being what it is, because it's the same right the way across the country. We did subsequently have further meetings that haven't come to a conclusion yet about whether there's a possibility of having a dedicated planning officer within our planning department working specifically for the registered providers. Whether this is going to be possible or not, it has been done in a specific case for a different purpose, where the outside person has actually contributed towards funding that post. But it's something that I would like as a recommendation from this committee that we pick up, because quite honestly, if we can get them building a lot faster, then we are going to start making dents into the numbers that we've got on the housing register and the numbers of people who are looking for shared ownership, because houses here are astronomical. Young people, unless they've got a really well-paid job, are never going to stand a chance of getting a house here. And one of the things I was quite shocked by when we did the work on dentistry, they were saying that dentists don't come to Dorset because they can't afford to live here. Now, if people on that sort of salary can't afford to purchase here, what on earth is the hope for any of our kids? So I want to weave that in as one of the recommendations when we get towards the end of the debate. So if I can come back to you on that, that would be useful. Sorry, Andrew Billany would like to comment.
Thank you. Just briefly, I just partly back to Councillor Kimber's point about co-ops and co-housing, and just wanted to stress as you said, Councillor Taylor, we've looked at the top four, the biggest 4 or 5 associations. It's worth stressing the breadth of what goes on here. It isn't either or. We try to push for development of new homes in various forms, and the Bridport co-housing scheme that opened relatively recently, 52 new homes, took a lot of doing, but over many years. But that's a really excellent example of the kind of co-op ethos, working with parish council, working with town council and council officers, etc. So there are other ways of doing this beyond the big four or the big five. And Bournemouth Churches Housing Association, they're another one because they've helped on that scheme. And we do good and pretty nationally recognised work around community land trusts as well. So we just wanted to stress that this isn't the only game in town. The other thing, well, I've got the microphone as well, is just around that wider point around matching demand and supply. I think we're not unusual across the country of having that mismatch of, most places need more homes. So that is very much the work we're doing with the housing associations in the context of this paper to make sure they can do the most that they can. But it's not seeing that as the only solution. And there are, for example, if somebody came to us saying we can provide low-cost home ownership for people, then clearly we'd talk to them, and maybe use of land. And the point about dentists as well, we're already talking a lot with health colleagues. I mean, Debbie's not here now, but meeting with Debbie later today around that crossover between health and housing as well. The point I'm trying to make is that there isn't one solution. We're trying to get this to work across a number of fronts.
Thank you. Jane?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I think the other area as well that needs to be recognised, and perhaps we could all do better in this, is engaging with the local communities for their support too with new housing. It's really essential because that can obviously, and local opposition can also cause delay. So we all have to be working together on this.
Thank you very much, Councillor Somper. Do you know, I live in hope that one day, somebody will come to planning and say, I need a house. I know you're recommending these are refused, but please, I need a house. Can somebody please build me one? Instead of all the hundreds of people that we get coming into us saying, you shouldn't be building here because my house is 60, 70 years old. That was a field one day. I know it was a field because I've still got brambles coming up. And can I get rid of the things? I have a garden full of brambles if I don't do anything. Because it was a farm. It was an open field. It was somebody's beautiful view at one time. And until we can get that across to people who are complaining about where development is, and particularly where affordable development is, I'm afraid we're going nowhere. It is really, really difficult. And that's when us as councillors really get it in the neck, because local people don't want development in a specific place. And we sit there and go, well, okay, tell me where you do want it then. There are right places and wrong places to build. I totally agree with that. But we have all, as a nation, as a county, as a group of residents and representatives of those residents, we've really got to get away from this. You don't want to build there because it's a nice little bit of green land. We haven't got that much in the way of brownfield sites. When I go up into the Midlands where I come from, you see these huge brownfield sites and I just go, oh God, if only we'd got them in Dorset. We haven't because we're not an industrial area, which means that infill is going to work to a point, but not to anything like the extent that we actually need it to make a dent on our housing needs. If I can go over to Councillor...
You've got Jane again.
Sorry, it's Councillor Somper.
Thank you. Yes, I think the point is it's about having the right homes in the right places. And sometimes it's not appropriate. And sometimes, you know, it's because the housing suggested in an area or in a place isn't necessarily right for that spot. So those right homes in the right places are what we all aspire to.
If I can just say later on in the agenda, we've got areas of work that we wanted to do, and one of them is entitled The Right House, the Right Person, the Right Place. Thank you. Councillor Cook, please.
Councillor Robin Cook, Stour and Allen Vale Ward. Thank you, Chairman. I mean, the debate today has just shown us what a complex issue this is, and it might be interesting actually thinking ahead on the agenda. This is something we really ought to go into more detail at this sort of meeting and maybe get the providers here. I think that's a very good suggestion. Anyway, try to pick something out of this that I want to have a shout out for East Borough. They are very good. They're very much on the ball. They're on the ground often and they know their area very well. And they do liaise with their local ward members. I know that for a fact. So a shout out for them. Some of the other names I'm involved with, I have been involved with, and the trouble is they've got too corporate. This is the problem. And it's the bean counters have taken over from the people that are at the coalface. Simple as that. How much, 2 or 3 questions here, Chairman, if you just bear with me. How much clout has Dorset Council got with these providers is point 1, okay? I'm needing to answer them, I can do them all, answer them anyway. So that's the first one. 2, we've heard about, I think 2 members here are supporting council house rebuilding from the sound of it, both from different political spectrums. Interesting to know, because I've got a similar background to Louis, although I'm a lot older, so, maybe I'm supporting that. But what I would say is that Dorset Council, as indeed Dorset County Council were doing for many years, are looking at their assets, and they're still looking at their assets. We own an enormous amount of land, and, why can't we encourage our providers to have some of that land that we're trying to make better use of to build on? The reason being that there's also, and this is where the bean counters will come into their own, we've got, you mentioned, Chairman, about the grade 2 properties, they're offloading like nobody's business, which I would agree. But if you read the small print now, with this net zero rush, the tsunami of legislation that's coming down from Whitehall about what you need to do to your house to make it legally compliant would mean a number of these providers are going to have a nightmare with existing properties. They're going to want to build new that are compliant. So maybe we need to get in at an early stage with our land bank and do some further discussions. There's a lot in there, sorry, but can I have some response on that, please? Thank you.
If I can go to Andrew for that, please.
I think it's an interesting point. I think it's about, in broadest terms. That's why we back to the earlier discussion about disposals. We just trying to make sure that people, if there is a hard to maintain or energy efficient home, we want to encourage the housing association to insulate, to make sure it's fit for purpose. And it's not answering your question directly. Clearly, that costs money, but there are grants available. We try to get them to recycle their investment, so it isn't all about a knee-jerk response to selling off a property because it's hard to insulate. So that's a very general question, but we do have those conversations a lot. Can I just come back on the holding the what powers do we have as well? We whilst it's been said a few times, they are independent organisations. They do have they are set up with, in broadest terms, social purpose, and their boards commit to providing social housing for people in areas like Dorset. So holding them to account is really to get them to put their money where their mouths are, to be blunt, to use that phrase. So we don't have direct power, but we certainly have a lot of influential power around making sure that they're holding to their purpose. One of the points that was there as a recommendation was to reinstate regular annual meetings, at least with leader and chief executives of each organisation. We've been doing that, and that's been very effective, specifically around making sure we're holding to those high level objectives. And then it's my job and my team's job to make sure it happens on a daily basis. Quite a general answer, Councillor, but I think it's a point well made. But we do want to make sure that we get the most out of our relationship with them.
Thanks, Chairman. Forgive me, I didn't want it to sound like a criticism, because I know it brings it back to the complexity of the issues. But I think we must highlight this, because this one, when the strategy is finished and we're looking at the results from that, that's going to throw out some interesting reading as well. So can we please keep, as far as we're able as a scrutiny committee, keep on top of this one and keep prompting where we can, please.
Okay, then would you like some feedback? Probably we can only really go in about 6 months' time on the actions requested from this paper. Yes. Is that what we're asking for? Okay. So Is that okay, George? Yeah, that will be the March meeting, which will be the last one of this council. So, Andrew Billany, can I? Yeah, and I'll come to you in a moment.
Apologies. I just wanted to, one thing I meant to say when in the last comment as well. I just want, if this committee comes back to this topic, we could perhaps do more to illustrate what how we set up as an organisation. We call ourselves an enabling authority. There's a lot. I think the members may find that interesting in terms of how we do hold housing associations to account, but also how we manage the market, if you like, because it's as much about how we're working with private landlords, other providers, what we're doing with our own temporary accommodation. It's complex, but it's something I feel we do well. But it's making sure we do manage that range of relationships and powers that we have. And perhaps that's something I'm more than happy to come back and talk about that in more specific detail. I think it's at the core of the question about how do we exercise our powers and influence as an authority.
Thank you. Can I go to Councillor Rennie first, and then it'll be Councillor Kimber.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Actually, that would be really useful because, sorry, I didn't mean to point. That would be really useful because that gives a wider oversight of actually what you're doing and the work that is underpinning everything. Because we got more of an understanding of that when we did this scrutiny. And I would like to say 50-odd housing providers. I know we only spoke to 4.5, because one was 2 providers in one. But all of the providers were sent a questionnaire, and they took the time, not all of them, but the majority of them sent back questions that were there helping to build up the work of the team. And also, people here are asking for the providers to be here in the room and want to talk to them. And I do say, when we started this journey, because Jane asked for it many years ago, I sat in the same room as her and Jill when we were in Southwark's house, and Jane was saying we should be interviewing and discussing and scrutinising providers. But a thing like the election, joint working together, everything changed, and this has taken a long time to come here. But the can of worms it opened, Jane at times, as I could see her, she's smiling. So obviously the housing portfolio holder is wanting to take this further as well. But please remember, everyone of this committee was invited to be part of the panel, so therefore you would have had the chance to be face-to-face with those providers. And every member of the panel, of the scrutiny committee, was asked to put your questions forward as well. And the panel was not a closed shop of just 3 members. We only had 3 people who, obviously, it takes time and people needed to be available. One thing that I think has come across from this today, and we had a lot of promise about contact and customer services, but I'd like to make sure that we at least could try for our members to try to get these contact numbers for everybody again. And please don't lose them this time, because we did have them. And Paul's quite right. We have had more magazines and newsletters from housing providers since we did this work as well. But we've got to remember the work was also about not just reviewing their work, but it was reviewing how they worked with this authority. And some great things came out of that about the question of planning and their need to perhaps get a bit of a move on within this work and to find an officer dedicated. And that is the work of scrutiny, that again, we've got the budget coming up and the budget briefings, and that's our opportunity at scrutiny panel to get our voice heard for the work that is needed. They also spoke about more prior notice when we need property for somebody who may need aids and adaptations, maybe becoming a young adult and need to be living in their own home, the supported accommodation that we build as well. And they spoke to us about that need to have more prior notification. And I think we've got to say thank you to the housing team for their thoughts that came to Cabinet last week about the housing board. And the board would have these sort of people sitting on it who actually ask for that help and support as well. I think all of it is making that journey more streamlined for our residents. I wrote loads of things down and I can't sort of find them all because so many people have said all the things we believe in. The RSLs, the Registered Social Landlord, don't have the land banks that they had. And so they're not able to build as easily now. We've got a huge development happening on the outskirts of Dorchester, and I felt Jill was talking about us in Dorchester and the residents who are fighting against this development and the need for the right house in the right place and not spoiling a view. But you don't get your RSLs building the rented property unless you are willing to accept the number of other homes that come with it, the more expensive homes that are the drain on the other services that we as a committee look at as well, around more older people move into the area, then they need more care homes later and the hospital and the support. The complexities of this are enormous. But for me, it's been an eye-opener. I knew that the housing team met with the RSLs on a regular basis, but didn't know what the outcomes were. So we've actually, I think as a council, formed a better relationship with the people who work with us, not just for us as well. So I think that is one big outcome that's come from it. And Jane, thank you for putting that thought in the process when we were all sitting in Southwark's house and you kept begging and begging and we had a COVID in between, and this has taken a long time to come to pass because we were so determined to meet the registered providers face to face rather than on a screen, and they turned up as teams to talk to us. It was interesting as well. We recognised some of the people who came to talk to us had worked for different authorities before we became the merged authority and worked for other housing associations as well, which made you realise they were bringing that breadth of expertise as well, not just from that private company that they've now become. I want to say just thank you to everybody who was involved with it. I enjoyed very much being part of it and learnt more and probably learnt to be a bit more tolerant about the right to buy, because I hated the right to buy. I was also brought up on a council estate, and I know how important it is to have those houses. But I learnt unless they got some more income back, I understood we as an authority could not manage our properties properly. So we would probably by now have been bankrupt trying to manage our properties. But I became a wee bit more tolerant, but we've always got to remember people still have the right to buy, and that's the biggest issue now for me, is we build a house and we pay for a house, and without that codicil within it, people still have that right to buy. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think you wanted a response,
No,
did you?
I just really wanted to get it off my chest.
Okay, Councillor Kimber, and then we'll go forward and make some recommendations.
Thank you, Chair. I remember you and I had a meeting many years ago about how can we get housing going and the difficult issues we had then. I'm looking at the recommendation, Chair, and part of this debate this morning has been that some councillors have not had the best relationship with housing associations. And I just wondered if part of our recommendation is that we've said that strong working between Dorset Council and housing associations and praise for the Dorset Council supports housing associations to develop new homes through its new enabling approach. I just wondered if we can add a part of that as also a better relationship with ward councillors for Dorset Council as a part of that. Now, I don't want to make it I would like Andrew to obviously take that up with the providers. I know I once formed a housing association. I was at a meeting with West Dorset, and I know how strong those particular meetings can be, that we're not doing enough. And I remember the housing co-op I formed at the time. We got 11 homes very, very quickly. So I just wonder if we can look at that recommendation to see a better relationship with ward councillors. Thank you, Chair.
I don't know whether Andrew wants to comment. I'm not quite sure how you can make people have a good relationship. I mean, I get on reasonably well with you, but I don't have to. I don't know whether... yeah.
We don't always get emails back from our own.
Yeah, if I can just go to Andrew on that one.
I mean, just very quickly, I certainly agreed to go back to the people who've contributed from the housing association, and I can stress that as one of the themes of this discussion is to make sure we keep that dialogue running effectively with all councillors, ward councillors on that. I think they generally did accept the point that was made in the panel discussions is ward councillors are often the first people that any resident will go to. I think we all recognise that, and they've recognised it as well. So I can certainly stress the point that Councillor Kimber's made because I think it's a common theme from today.
Okay, so if we can go on to the recommendations. So what I've got is the first recommendation, that the committee notes the findings of the review and has considered the ongoing work relating to the housing strategy and the associated roles carried out by the housing providers of social housing. So that's the first recommendation, which is effectively that we note it, therefore we don't need to vote on it. The second recommendation I was going to put in was that the committee requests that the portfolio holder for adult social care, health and housing oversees the actions within this paper, because I don't want these actions to get lost. And I'd like to put an additional little bit onto that because we talked about planning and how it works with planning. So could I also put that in addition, the portfolio holder continues discussions started with the planning department to explore the feasibility of a dedicated planning officer?
Yeah, obviously that would be the portfolio holder for planning, who obviously is not here today, so I can't speak for another portfolio, but discussions that go through the housing board, which will include portfolio holders in other areas. Those discussions at that level will happen, but also there's an officer layer underneath that where those conversations will happen, but I can't make commitments for another portfolio holder.
Planning board.
Could we ask the planning board if they would consider?
No, the housing board.
Sorry, the housing board, if they would consider.
I can't make a commitment for another portfolio holder on what they're doing within their area, but I can tell you that we haven't had our first meeting yet, so there'll be discussions with various portfolio holders, and that was discussed at Cabinet and approved on who those will be, but also that layer underneath of officers who are constantly having those conversations. What I can do is take your comments to the portfolio holder in planning, but I can't comment on what that response will be. But I can certainly make sure that that portfolio holder is aware of your suggestion. Can I just also add, just as a side, actually, around that conversation that you've been having about the contact with housing associations and the problems that some members encounter. I think it's also important to say that the housing associations obviously deal with probably hundreds of issues, small issues, medium issues and large issues all of the time. And of course, us as members, we hear of problems in this area, and it is very unlikely that we're going to be contacted about issues that have been resolved and been resolved swiftly for tenants and for residents. So just to highlight that. I mean, that goes across the board, obviously, in all the things we get in our inboxes, but just to be clear that they are dealing with hundreds all of the time, lots of them are very successfully.
Can I then just look at some wording? So what, George? Do you know, this is why we employ George. Right, what George has suggested is that we ask the planning portfolio holder to consider the feasibility of a dedicated planning officer to deal with registered providing planning applications and to report back to the Scrutiny Committee. How does that fit?
Everybody's nodding.
Everybody's nodding. So I think we've got that. Do you just... Hang on just a moment. I knew there'd be a fly in the ointment.
I try not to be a fly in the ointment. I think to some extent you opened up with, this isn't quite, it's a conversation that hasn't quite finished. I think to some extent it would help if we had a recommendation to carry on those conversations with planning around how we improve the planning process, because then we can work through the feasibility of a dedicated planning officer, rather than because we're jumping straight to a recommendation which hasn't been worked through in detail with a planning team, including the portfolio holder, as Councillor Somper said. So direct recommendation, I don't think we're quite ready for that direct recommendation just yet.
So can we give support for the continued discussion that the continued discussions that are going on regarding improving that's not the wrong word, streamlining the planning applications for registered providers? Is that where we are?
Yeah, I mean, I think that certainly works for me in terms of, and then we can loop that back to this committee, but also through the portfolio holders as well. I think that's probably the point that Councillor Somper's making, and just to need to involve Councillor Walsh as well as reporting back to this committee. That's what we're trying to get right. That feels to be a workable solution, I think.
Okay, and then just add on the end and report back to this committee. Can you just read that one out then, George? Where are we with that?
So what I've got is to give support, or that the committee gives support to continued discussions regarding the planning applications for registered providers, and the relevant portfolio holder reports back to the committee on this topic.
Come on, Jane, what's the problem?
Thank you, Chairman. No, not a problem. Just I don't feel comfortable committing to something for another portfolio holder who is not here.
Okay, we'll make this as a totally separate recommendation. So it's not under the bit that asks the portfolio holder to oversee the actions within the paper.
So Councillor Somper, you don't have to commit to something on behalf of another portfolio holder. It's for the portfolio holder to decide themselves whether they want to accept the recommendations or not, and for them to give their reasons to the committee why they've chosen to either accept it or not accept it.
Okay, are we there? Right. I'll propose that lot. Can I have a seconder, please? Okay.
Are we going to ask within this as well? No, we were going to ask for back.
Yeah, I think you've got a note that we'd like something to come back in about 6 months. Jane?
Sorry, just had communication in my ear that this might be an option for place scrutiny, as planning falls under the place scrutiny committee. But then there's a dilution, isn't there? So, yeah, okay.
There is an overlap with place scrutiny, but as we've asked the question, I think it would be appropriate for it to come back to here. Okay, and then if we want to refer it to place for more work, we can do. Okay, so if I can have a vote on all this lot. Okay, all in favour? Magic. All right, thank you very much then. Right. That was a really useful discussion. And thank you all the members who've taken part in it, and thank you for the officers. I thought that was really useful. So if we can come on to the next agenda item now, which are the forward plans, our work plans, our work programme. So you'll see that in October, we've got performance scrutiny and NHS dental services coming back. And we've got bits and pieces on for the rest of the year. What I think I'd like to talk about is the programming meeting that we had in July. So thank you very much for everyone who attended that. That was a really, really useful meeting. What we chose as a committee, as a working group at that, was that we had 3 priorities for the remainder of the year, which were complex mental health and neurodiversity. This was one that came in from Children's Services that I think is a really interesting one. It puts together not only the work that we do with children, with SEND, but also the work that Health do through their community CAMS staff. So that will be a scrutiny that we'll get going that will be involving not only us, but also Health as well. Care on the ground, which that will be down to our social services team and down to John, who's nodding his head for me now. And the last one, which was one that I mentioned in the last discussion that we had, the right house, the right person, the right place. That could be a huge one. So all these 3, we're going to need to set up either working groups, or we may do them all online, we may do them as whole committees, but it will be work outside of this committee and then reporting back to this committee. Just hoping George is going to nod. There were always also 3 topics that the committee chose to receive further information on. That was obesity and Live Well Dorset, dementia services, and also pharmacies. Pharmacies has come to the forefront again in the last few weeks because of what's been going on in Verwood. But I think there's quite a lot around pharmacy service that we could look at, and I would very much value the input of the likes of Belinda, who's a pharmacist locally, and other people who may be able to add. Yeah, please come in, George.
So with regards to the pharmacy's piece of work, through discussion, it might be more appropriate for the overview committee at the moment. but there's still possibly some informal work, either as an all-member session on pharmacies or an informal committee session on pharmacies to receive further information about it. But a larger piece of work on pharmacies would probably be more suited to the overview committee at this present time.
Thank you. I've just had a note in from...
Shane?
No, that's not Shane.
From planning.
From Councillor Walsh, that's it, who's just come back and said, OK, so he must be watching us today. Thank you. So I think it's going to be a case of keeping your eyes open for the informal working groups, keep your eyes open for webinars that will involve scrutiny, but all members will be invited to. So if there's something that pops up, say, on pharmacies or on Live Well Dorset, bear in mind this has been requested from the Scrutiny Committee, and it's for us to take questions from there. And I think that's about it. As I said earlier, there's no exempt business today, so thank you very much, everybody, for a really good meeting, and I'd like to close this meeting at 11 minutes past 12. Thank you.